But what's really fascinating is that this same basic grammar really does show up across all four quadrants. What is
So
the
we're
phrase here? Only variety can absorb variety. Is that
only
right?
variety can absorb variety. And so if there's a variety of disturbances, there needs to be a variety of responses to maintain homeostasis.
So if I've got 99 problems and 5 ways to solve a problem, that's bad.
You're in a lot of trouble.
If we're in a conflict between two parties, the more developed party has more of the responsibility to navigate that conflict because they have more methods of problem solving available to them.
Remember, one of my sayings is the person with the deepest consciousness has the most responsibility.
Exactly. Yep.
According to H. Ross Ashby's law of requisite variety, the person with the most deepest consciousness doesn't just have the most responsibility, they have the most power in a system.
Maybe this thing that we call love is actually like the interior face of that same intelligence, right? That felt sense of a system coming back into coherence and into harmony, whether we're talking about a self system or a family system or even a social system, a civilizational system. All right, so today we're going to be exploring something that really I think sits pretty much right at the crossroads of systems theory, psychology, and integral thinking, and it's something called cybernetics. What exactly are cybernetics? Well, Norbert Wiener, who has a very funny name, uh, coined this term cybernetics in the 1940s to describe basically how complex systems regulate themselves through feedback. And we can really think of it as basically like the science of self-correction, right? This is how systems sense change, how they communicate internally, and how they maintain their overall coherence, really. And the more you look at it, the more you see that cybernetics isn't just about machines or information networks. It's really the deeper logic of life itself. It's how organisms and relationships and cultures maintain their coherence in the face of change. In integral terms, I think cybernetics really gives us the grammar of the lower right quadrant, which is the world of systems and communications networks and sort of the inter-objective patterns that are running through those networks and those systems. But what's really fascinating is that this same basic grammar really does show up across all four quadrants, right? I mean, it shows up as bodily regulation in the upper right quadrant. It shows up as reflexive awareness in the upper left quadrant, mutual attunement and co-regulation in the lower left quadrant. So what we're really looking at here is, the universe learning to correct itself from every possible angle, right? Physiologically, psychologically, relationally, and socially. In other words, this same basic principle, this kind of giving and receiving of feedback, this is what explains how bodies stay alive, how couples stay connected, and how civilizations thrive and survive in the face of crisis. And when we really zoom out, pull all the way back, cybernetics starts to look kind of like cosmic habits in a sense. It's how evolution itself keeps learning through these feedback mechanisms. And every self-organizing system is basically practicing this same intelligence. It's sensing differences, it's responding to disturbances, and it's restoring balance at a higher level of complexity. Which makes me wonder, Keith, maybe this thing that we call love is actually like the interior face of that same intelligence, right? Like maybe love is that felt sense of a system coming back into coherence and into harmony, whether we're talking about a self system or a family system or even a social system, a civilizational system, right? Keith, this seems like a great place for us to start. If cybernetics is the universe's way of maintaining this coherence, what does that look like from inside of a relationship? How do couples and families or communities become self-correcting systems of love and feedback?
Well, first of all, yes, everything you said. In Taoism, they have a principle called the principle of return. And principle of return, if you go in one direction far enough, you start going in the other direction. Things that go up eventually come down, and things that go down eventually go up. And back in the 30s, Norbert Wiener noticed this about systems. He was looking at animal systems, mechanical systems, and people, and developed a field of cybernetics, which is initially described pure lower right. So everything, you never can separate one quadrant from the other. So of course it shows up in the other quadrants. And also, if I had a name like Norbert Wiener, I'd probably avoid the left quadrants myself. You know, you know, I'd have a lot of self-awareness if we got somebody parents gave you a name like Norbert Wiener.
Yeah,
So anyway,
talk about feedback.
okay, so everybody noticed when he came up with this that this was exactly right. There's positive feedback systems where I do more, I do a little bit, you do a little bit more, I do a little bit more, I do a little bit more. You notice that's increasing energy. And if that's not met at some point and then adjusted like a thermostat, it explodes. And you have negative feedback systems where you do a little bit more, I do a little bit less, you do a little bit less, and that freezes unless it has another system. And everything in the universe happens in homeostasis. The implicate order, as Bohm called it. And all that implicate order are feedback systems, and that's cybernetics. But then, so people use this a lot to understand things, and this is very popular in the 30s and 40s because empiricism ruled during that time. A lot of people denied the left quadrants. Flatland was, gaining momentum. It was going to peak, in the 50s, and then it began to be, and then very much like a cybernetic system, it began to adjust towards subjectivity, in the 60s and so on, everywhere. So in 1956, H. Ross Ashby developed a law of requisite variety. Now, look, I really have been working to remember the phrase H. Ross Ashby's law of requisite variety, because I never use those two words, requisite variety. I always use other ones that sound a lot like them. And so it's just, reliable, velocity. I mean, like that. But it's an important law, and I'll tell you why. In a system, it's not the part of the system that has the most force, that has the most influence on the system. It's the part of the system that has the most options. And if you're in a system, you need as many options or more than you have potential disturbances in the system, or the system falls apart. Okay? You need as many options or more than there are potential disturbances in the system.
What is the phrase here? Only variety can absorb variety. Is that
Only
right?
variety can absorb variety. And so if there's a variety of disturbances, there needs to be a variety of responses to maintain homeostasis.
So if I've got 99 problems and 5 ways to solve a problem, that's bad.
You're in a lot of trouble. And
Right.
eventually,
But if I have 150 ways to solve a problem and I'm dealing with 99 problems, that's a different story.
not only will you maintain homeostasis, you'll support the evolution of the system. And the person in the system that has the most options, that they're able to embody, that person has the most power. Now, you notice I said that they're able to embody. Awareness isn't enough. It has to be productive awareness, productive self-awareness. And so if someone has a capacity, has multiple options and a capacity to do those multiple options, that person has the most power in a system. Yeah. And
This is, and we've talked about aspects of this before, Keith, how, like, for example, if we're in a conflict between two parties, the more developed party has more of the responsibility to navigate that conflict because they have more opportunities. They have more methods of problem solving available to them.
they have deeper consciousness.
Right.
And so remember, one of my sayings is the person with the deepest consciousness has the most responsibility.
Exactly. Yep.
According to H. Ross Ashby's law of requisite variety,
He nailed it.
That nailed it. The person with the most deepest consciousness doesn't just have the most responsibility, they have the most power in a system.
Right.
And we can see how all the systems understand this and have it be central parts. For instance, integral, of course. Anytime you expand horizontal health, you're expanding your repertoire of responses. Okay, that's more power in the system, deeper consciousness. Every time you take a move towards a later developmental worldview, um, amber the umber the orange, that's
Mhm.
including transcend. You have more options. You have more power in the system. It's one of the reasons why the higher that you are, the farther that you are, the more mature you are in your worldview, generally the more impact you're going to tend to have. And Gen's been saying this for years. So cybernetics is a science of that. Um, in terms of psychological health is characterized by flexibility and adaptability. Okay, that's Gregory Lester's thing, in which I love very much. In interpersonal neurobiology, response flexibility is multiple options. Um, and so that which is the study of how brains interact with other brains in terms of everything. Okay. Now, what this does is it is it is it gives another angle at some of the stuff that we've been talking about for a while.
Yep.
One of the things it gives an angle to is the characteristics of optimal relationship, uh, uh, um, optimal marriage, love affair, parenting, leadership. What are those qualities? Well, one is warmth. What warmth does interpersonally is keep channels of communication open. And so to be able
Right.
to have systems regulating each other, they have to be in communication. Those channels have to be open. And to a certain extent, they need to be relaxed,
I
because
mean, when they're closed down, Keith, I mean, a closed feedback loop is about as good of a description of shadow as it gets, right? It's like this emotional circuit that never really reaches awareness and never reaches the light of awareness. Trauma, you know, doubly so, triply so. It's a frozen feedback loop
well,
where,
actually, it's more of a positive feedback loop in that I know the name's familiar, um, uh, um, counterintuitive, but it's positive in that what happens with trauma or defensive states, they're constellated, and instead of regulating them down into the present moment, which we do with all of our memories and anticipations, they
Mhm.
escalate in a positive feedback until the system begins to creak with
Mm.
anxiety, panic, depression, distraction, that kind of stuff. And it gets harder and harder to regulate it back down. Here's
Right, right.
most of the treatments for trauma and PTSD and trauma learning are treatments that bring people back into the present moment. Because
Right.
when you're awake in the present moment, your systems, your nervous system, everything is responding, in a cybernetic fashion, maintaining homeostasis. Um,
Right.
so warm keeps channels open. Flexible is multiple options. Firm is there are certain aspects of a system that are shared values and shared scaffolding that we need to that you have to agree on to be able to have a functional system. And if you're aware of what those are, don't interrupt each other, or don't call each other names, things like that, or listen when the other person talks.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. So firm keeps the structure in place so that the system can evolve. And resolved is the one that people miss the most. Resolved, remember, all the stuff that we're talking about are maps. Ken said, I'm a map maker. Okay. So you want to know where you're going, because when you get in the defensive state or trauma restimulation or something like that, you think you're going towards a positive state, but a positive outcome, but you're not.
Right.
That there's a destructive agenda. But if you have resolve, that resolve guides you, and then you can guide warmth, flexibility, and firmness in a direction. And since everything is processes, all life is processes, they're cybernetic processes. And if you add all the quadrants, then fine. It's a great way of looking at it. Now you're navigating towards evolution, because if you're navigating well, you stay in the present moment, you're myelinating the circuits that help you navigate well and stay in the present moment.
So just to kind of summarize, maybe paraphrase a little bit. So if we have healthy cybernetic feedback loops happening in the lower right quadrant of a relationship, right, between two bodies, there's that in terms of how they exchange information, the channels are open and all that.
Mhm.
The feeling tone of that, the shared feeling tone of that in the lower left is going to be something like warmth. It's going to be something like this feeling of attunement, which has a warm kind of quality to it. And there's some of that warmth in the upper left too. Like there's a dispositional kind of warmth, right? But really we're talking about the feeling of open channels, open feedback between two bodies, between two polons, which takes the form of warmth when we look at that from the lower left quadrant. Is that
Yeah,
accurate?
and not only that, because all states all states are complementary. If you
Mhm,
and I are feeling warmth towards each other,
mhm.
we're probably more li we're not probably, we're more likely to be feeling a sense of warmth about ourselves. Like, if I'm
Mhm.
feeling like what we're doing is loving and good, I feel like I'm more of a loving and good person. Um,
Yeah.
and so and not only that, if we're doing that, if we're going over to the upper right, our biological markers are lining up with each other.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, right now you're in my heart rates, and heart of coherence and so on are co-regulating each other, and then it moves to the right in terms of what are the forms of communication or the rules of the system.
Cycles around. Yep.
Cycles around.